Have you ever really stopped to think about how software gets made? I mean, all the steps it goes through before it just works on your computer or phone.
It's quite a process, isn't it? Not just coding and hitting compile. There's a huge amount of testing involved to make sure it's reliable.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to dig into today. Specifically, alpha and beta testing. We got some great sources that really break these down.
Yeah, they do. Our mission, if you like, is to unpack the key differences.
Mm.
What is alpha, what is beta,
Who does the testing? Where does it happen?
and why you absolutely need both. They're not interchangeable.
Definitely not. So let's jump in. Alpha testing first.
Sounds good. So alpha testing. Fundamentally, it's a type of acceptance testing. But the really key thing, it happens inside the company that's building the software.
Okay, internal testing.
Right. The big goal is to find bugs, potential problems, that sort of thing, before it ever gets seen by the public or actual customers. Catching things early is huge.
Why is that? Just easier to fix.
Well, yes, partly, but also think about the cost. A bug found during alpha testing might be, relatively minor to fix. But if that same bug slips through to beta, or worse, after release.
Ah, okay. It becomes much more expensive and potentially damaging to fix later on.
Precisely. Resource-intensive, reputation damage, all that.
Got it. So alpha is like the internal dress rehearsal, and the name alpha, that relates to it being early.
Exactly. First letter of the Greek alphabet.
Mm-hmm.
It happens near the end of development, but crucially, before beta testing.
And who's actually doing this testing?
It's internal folks. Could be dedicated QA testers, maybe even developers sometimes, or other employees. They're trying to use the software like a typical user would, simulating those tasks.
But it's all happening on the company's turf.
Correct. At the developer's site, often you'll need like a dedicated test lab set up for this. Controlled conditions.
A controlled environment makes sense for digging deep.
It does.
Yeah.
And the testing itself can be, well, a mix. It often involves both white box.
Where you can see the internal code.
Yeah, testing the actual structure and logic, and also black box testing.
Which is more like a user just interacting with the interface, not knowing the code underneath.
You got it. Focusing purely on functionality. Does it do what it's supposed to do?
So you're kind of checking under the hood and taking it for a drive.
That's a great analogy. And the priority here, finding those really critical bugs, the showstoppers.
Things that would just break the whole experience.
Exactly. And the idea is those get fixed pretty much immediately.
What about things like, say, heavy-duty security testing or checking if it can handle thousands of users at once? Is that the focus in alpha?
Not usually the main focus. You might do some initial checks, but the deep dives into reliability under load or comprehensive security hardening, that often comes a bit later. Alpha is more about getting the core function stable first.
Okay. So what needs to be ready before you can even start alpha testing? Are there prerequisites?
Oh, absolutely. We call them entry criteria. You can't just jump in.
Right. So what's on that checklist?
Typically, you'd need a solid software requirements document knowing what it's supposed to do. You need test cases written.
To cover those requirements.
Precisely. You need a test team that knows what they're doing, that test lab environment we mentioned, and a specific QA build of the software, a version ready for testing.
Oh, okay.
Plus, usually a tool to manage the tests and track bugs, and, importantly, a traceability matrix.
Traceability matrix, what's that?
It basically links the requirements to the test cases. It ensures you've actually got a test planned for every single feature or requirement. Nothing gets missed.
Ah, clever. Keeps things organized. So that's getting in. How do you know when you're done with alpha? What are the exit criteria?
Good question. Generally, alpha wraps up when, well, all those planned test cases have been run and hopefully passed.
Hopefully.
Right. And all the really serious bugs, the high-severity ones, have been fixed and confirmed. You compile a summary report, make sure no new features are suddenly being added.
Feature creep, yeah.
Exactly. Stop adding things. And then usually there's a formal sign-off, alpha complete.
Okay. So looking back at alpha, what are the big wins, the main advantages?
Several big ones. You get that early insight into reliability. You can simulate how users might behave. You catch those showstopper errors before they escape into the wild.
Saves a lot of potential pain later.
Definitely. And you can spot issues with the design or the basic functionality early on, too.
Makes sense. Are there any, downsides or limitations to alpha testing?
Yeah, a couple. Since the software might still be changing a bit, you sometimes can't test every little detail in extreme depth.
Because it's still a moving target, sort of.
Kind of. And, sometimes there can be a bit of friction. Developers might not love hearing about all the bugs testers are finding in their baby.
Huh, I can imagine. Okay, so that's alpha. Internal, early, focused on stability and critical bugs. Let's switch gears. Beta testing. How's that different?
The biggest difference is who does the testing. Beta testing is external. It's performed by real users, actual customers out in the real world.
Ah, so not employees in a lab anymore?
Nope. It's user acceptance testing, but with your target audience. Think of it as the final hurdle, the last check before the big launch.
So timing-wise, it's right at the end.
Pretty much the last stage before shipping or going live. It's that final validation.
And because it's real users, the environment changes completely too, right? No more lab.
Exactly. It happens wherever the user normally is, at their office, at home, on their mobile device, wherever they actually use the software. No special setup needed from the dev team side.
Is it typically as long as alpha testing?
Usually shorter, often just a few weeks. The goal isn't that deep, exhaustive internal check anymore. It's more about real-world performance and feedback.
In the type of testing. Still white box and black box.
Mostly black box. Beta testers generally are looking at the code. They're focused on the experience. Is it easy to use? Does it crash? Does it meet their needs? Usability is huge here.
Okay, so less about fixing every critical bug immediately, like an alpha.
Right. Beta is more about collecting feedback. Users will report bugs, sure, but also suggest improvements, point out confusing parts.
Things the internal team might have missed because they're too close to it.
Exactly. You get perspectives you just can't replicate internally. This feedback often gets earmarked for, say, the next version or an early update, rather than holding up the initial release, unless it's truly critical.
So it's refining the edges, gathering that user intelligence. What about things like reliability and security in beta? Are they checked?
Oh, absolutely. This is where you really see how robust and secure it is in a real-world context, under normal and sometimes abnormal user conditions.
Makes sense. Okay, entry criteria for beta, what you need before you let real users loose on it.
Well, first, you need that sign-off from alpha testing, confirmation that it's stable enough.
Right, you don't want to give users something completely broken.
Definitely not. So you need the beta version of the software itself, an environment ready for release, even if it's a limited one, and crucially, a way to capture all that feedback and bug reports effectively.
A system for collecting the input. Got it. And when does beta testing end? The exit criteria.
Beta usually wraps up when the major issues reported by users have been dealt with. You've gathered and analyzed the feedback, often in a specific report, and delivered a final summary of the beta test phase.
Okay, so the advantages of beta testing. Why bother with the complexity of managing external testers?
Oh, the payoff is huge. It drastically cuts the risk of failure after launch because you've had real customers validate it.
Real-world proof.
Exactly. You get to test your support systems, your server infrastructure under real load. The feedback directly improves product quality. Honestly, it's often cheaper than trying to get that kind of data any other way.
And it builds relationships too, right, with early adopters.
Definitely. Creates goodwill, makes customers feel involved, increases satisfaction. Huge benefits.
But it can't be all smooth sailing. What are the challenges?
Well, managing it is harder. You don't control the user's environments or exactly how they test. It's the real world. It's messy.
Less control than the alpha lab.
Much less. And just finding the right beta testers and keeping them engaged and providing useful feedback, that could be a challenge in itself sometimes.
You can see that. Now, our source material mentioned different kinds of beta tests.
Yes, it's not always one size fits all. You have, like, traditional beta, aiming for broad market feedback. Then public beta.
Like when Microsoft releases early Windows versions.
Exactly, open to anyone. Technical beta might be more for IT pros or internal groups outside Dev QA. Focus beta zeroes in on maybe one or two specific new features.
Get detailed feedback on just that part.
Right, and there's even post-release beta, where you keep gathering feedback after launch to improve future versions. The type you choose depends on the product and what you need to learn.
That makes sense. Lots of options. Okay, could we maybe summarize the core differences side by side? Alpha versus beta, boil it down.
Sure. Let's hit the highlights. Alpha. Internal testers. Developer site. Less focus initially on deep reliability security, uses white and black box, needs a lab environment, longer cycle usually, fixes critical bugs immediately, aims for internal QA before beta.
Okay, internal focus. And beta.
Beta. External end users, clients location real world, does focus on reliability, security, robustness in practice, mostly black box, uses real environments, shorter cycle weeks. collects feedback often for later versions, aims for user validation and real-world readiness.
That's a really clear contrast, internal polish versus external validation.
You nailed it.
Now, people sometimes get confused about these, right? Are there common myths we should bust?
Oh, yeah. One big myth is that they happen too late to really matter. That's just wrong. They catch critical things and give user insights you can't get otherwise.
What else?
Another is that they're basically the same test. We've just spent time showing how different they are, different people, places, goals.
Right, lab versus real world is a huge difference.
Huge. Then there's the idea that beta testing is just too hard and time-consuming for the value it gives. It is work, yes, but that real-world feedback, invaluable. Seriously.
Prevents bigger headaches later?
Absolutely. And the last myth ties into that beta testing doesn't give you much useful data. A well-run beta test gives you tons of data you couldn't possibly get any other way.
Good to clear those up. So pulling it all together, what's the final word on alpha and beta testing?
Well, they're both absolutely critical, but they serve very different purposes. Alpha builds that stable foundation internally, gets the core right.
Lays the groundwork.
Exactly. But beta is where the rubber meets the road. That real user feedback is what ultimately shapes a successful product. You can have the most technically perfect software, but if users don't like it or can't use it effectively,
It doesn't matter how clean the code is.
pretty much. Even the names, alpha and beta,
Yep.
first and second, they show that sequence. Alpha prepares it, beta validates it.
Alpha's perfecting the recipe in your kitchen.
And beta is seeing if customers actually want to eat it. And maybe finding out they prefer a bit less salt.
Huh. Great analogy. It really highlights how different companies might approach these stages differently too, depending on their product or how much risk they're willing to take, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The criteria, the length, the type of beta, it's all adaptable.
This has been really illuminating. It's clear they're distinct, sequential, and both totally vital steps.
Agreed. It really pulls back the curtain a bit on how the software we use every day gets refined. There's a lot of work behind the scenes.
Definitely makes you appreciate it more. So next time you're using a new app, or even just get an update, maybe take a second to think about the journey it took, the internal checks, the real-world testing. And that leads us to a final thought for you to consider. What other hidden, complex processes are humming along behind the scenes of the technology we rely on every single day? Something to ponder.